Hello everyone, welcome to Lecture 1, or the TLDR version of Lecture 1. If you haven't done so already, just expand Lectures, click on Lecture 1, and let's go. So this week's lecture is dedicated to introducing HTML, and you'll notice that the Tute and Lab exercises related to this lecture are contained in Tute Lab 2. So on campus, what we do is the first week is really about setting up. And so then we have the week 1 lecture, and then we come back in the following week and do the Tute and Lab materials that are related to the lecture in the previous week. So that is what you should be doing. You should be looking at the lecture for the week, and then having a look at the materials for the following week, and then we'll go through the teaching materials in the live chat in that week. So I'm going to discuss the history, and I'll just sort of minimize all this ancillary information. Not so much really to sort of test you on anything, but when you're developing, sometimes you're asked to maintain or rejuvenate a web page or a website, and it's a good idea to know what sort of version of the code you're looking at, what code is retired, what you shouldn't be using, what you should be removing, and also just having an appreciation of the history of the World Wide Web, I think is always useful, particularly from the point of view of human endeavor. And also there are quirks you will find in HTML, CSS and JavaScript programming, and knowing that the history has been a little bit disorganized and dynamic, that will give you an appreciation that it's not you, it's actually how everything is developed. So if you see something that doesn't make sense, often it's because someone had a good idea, but it didn't take off, but no one deleted the information, that sort of thing. So first of all, there is a bit of confusion between the internet and the World Wide Web. So the internet has been around for a lot longer than the World Wide Web, and is essentially the hardware that the World Wide Web, really a kind of software, sits on top of. So the internet, lots of machines and networks connected to each other, and becoming more and more connected. And what the World Wide Web is just really a piece of software that, well, lots of pieces of software, let's be honest, that allow the machines to communicate to each other and sort of direct traffic. And the main thing is documents are served to you, and in order to get to those documents, you need to know what the address of that document is, so a universal resource identifier or locator, URL. And by clicking on links, you can go to a machine anywhere in the world and go somewhere on their hard drive to access a document. So this is Tim Berners-Lee. He's largely credited for pioneering hypertext markup language. So he was working on that in the 80s and inventing the World Wide Web in 1989. And we owe him a great deal of thanks, because he could be the richest person in the world, could be like a Bill Gates or former Steve Jobs, but he decided to give away this invention for free, just so that the world could benefit from his idea. So basically, to summarize, every time you click on a link like this, you'd have to pay a small royalty. So just during the patent period, which is, I think, about 10, maybe 20 years. So click on this. This is a modal box. Some of you might want to develop a kind of modal box in your assignment. So I've got an example of one here. Click on that. This is the 2012 Olympics. Tim's over here. For a better view, click on this link. I'd like to have this one here, but the London Olympics Committee decided I couldn't embed that version. He also gives a really good talk on what it was like in the early stages of the internet development, even describing his boss's comments that his idea was vague but interesting, which is, you know, it's something worthy to look at and understand how the whole internet idea, World Wide Web idea took off. And I'll just close that. So hypertext, basically this web page is an example of hypertext. There's text that is on the screen, and then behind the scenes there is other text that is not to be shown to humans, and but you know, is to describe how that text is meant to be laid out. So for example, all of these are in list elements, li elements, and the whole thing is in a ul, unordered list element. Here's an example of some hypertext. So, and of course Tim's invention. So we see this text, which is displayed to a human, and this is the address of the machine that we want to get information from. So the RMIT web server, the main RMIT web server, and we want to go to the home page, or if you like, the top of the web document folder. And we'll be setting your accounts up on Core Teaching. Most of you should have a Core Teaching account set up by now. If you don't, contact ITS, but also maybe contact me. Sometimes there's a bit of a delay, especially if you're a late enrollment, but we can generally, you know, check to see whether you have an account. So as I say, the main take-home thing here, hypertext is made up of text you can see, that a human can see, and then there's text that's behind the scenes that sort of augment that text to say how it is meant to be displayed in the case of list elements and maybe bold text, or any sort of function that it has. So this text will be a link to another resource on the web. So the World Wide Web these days essentially is made up of servers that serve content. This is just the way that it's evolved. And so clients via many devices will make a request, and the server will listen to the request, prepare a response, and deliver content back to the machine. And there's a small delay, you know, depending on how good all the connections are between you and the server. If there's anything bad happening, obviously, you know, the communication won't get through and you won't get what you're looking for. One thing you'll see is a lot of these communication protocols will have an extra S. So if we see up here, there's an extra S on this URL or URI. So we're using the HTTP protocol, but the S stands for secure. So really in the late 90s, we worked out a way how we could communicate between a server and a client all through the internet, which could be all over the world. And so, of course, people can be listening in on communications at any point between here and here. And we created a protocol whereby we could encrypt data and, okay, maybe not Russia or the FBI, but essentially it's very difficult for anyone to kind of crack the code and break into the communications. Not impossible, but just highly improbable. So even though there are peer-to-peer connections, so on Skype, for example, you know, really it's two people communicating with each other on a equal level, but most communications are clients, users, people with browsers, connecting to a server such as the one at RMIT, in this case Titan, for information and for documents such as this web page. So I've got a sort of list here of the sequence. So you make a request, you wait, and a response comes back down the pipeline. So HTML version 1. Now you will never be asked to create a page in this version, and I don't even think there are real web pages out there, but there is like there is this sort of history project that was set up a couple of years ago to actually dig up the very first web pages that existed back in the 1990, and to actually showcase them at CERN. So if we click on the terminal version, we'll click on the browser version just to show you what it looks like in a modern browser. So very plain. It's just got the default browser styling sheet, so links are blue. But we'll have a look at what it looked like in 1990. So you get to see this. This doesn't quite work. You actually have to click here to get a cursor. So I'm quite interested in seeing more. So I'm going to press enter. So I want to see, who was involved in this project in 1990, and we get a list of people. So this person, and here's Tim. So this was written in, I think, 1990, and there's a little bit of history on Tim of how he was developing Hypertext in 1980, and how this project, this W3 project, is using a modified version of Hypertext, and is basically the internet. And so not the internet, the World Wide Web. It's very easy to confuse internet and World Wide Web together. So you can have a look around if you like. It's quite interesting, but this is what it looks like in a more modern browser. So let's close out of that. Notice cern.ch hypertext history project. So what you'll see is, even in version 1, 2 elements. There's a header element, and if you've done C programming, you'll see that this is a standard artifact, and even a book. So in modern web pages, I'll talk about this later, but this header tag is not the same header tag that's used in modern HTML. So header is now renamed as head, and contains information, and I've tried to describe this as it's the sort of information you would find at the start of a book, maybe the end of the book, who the publisher is, who the author is, and maybe a little bit of dedicated to my mother, whatever authors like to do. But it's not actually it's not really part of the body of the book. The body of the book is chapter 1 all the way through to the final chapter. So there was a body tag in the original version, and the only difference is we write it in lowercase. So the body contains a human readable content, and this is the modern day header element, which is like your what goes at the top of the page. So let me just bring this back into view. So if you like, this is sort of like the header area, and I've got navigation as part of my web page. Then this really is the sort of the body. This is if you like, the main content, but all of this that you see is a part of the body, and there's even a footer down the bottom. But we'll be looking at that more in a moment. So a modern document should basically have this. So you have doc type HTML right at the top, HTML tags, and then inside you'll have a head tag to contain that information I was referring to, and a body tag that contains all your content that is for humans to see. Some other elements you will see in this original homepage is a tag that's being deprecated. And so this was actually connected to the next computer. And if anyone knows anything about that, this is when Steve Jobs was fired from Apple. He set up a new computer called the Next Computer company. And when he came back to Apple, they actually, acquired all his software, put it into their Macintoshes. So this tag died pretty quickly, but some other tags have survived. So, headings and I keep forgetting what the D stands for. I think it's descriptive list, or it might be document list. Maybe I should have something open to tell me that. I'll look. I think it's covered in the tutes, but I'll definitely try and find that out. Just noting a little typo here, so that should be service. I might change that. Again, very easy to fix typos. There we go. Oh, no, it's not service, it's survive. That's what I'm saying, survive. That's what I want. So these tags survive today, but they are written in lowercase. That's very important. But the most important tag is, as I said, this hypertext tag. So this attribute has died. So something equals something inside the opening tag. That element, that is dead. href is written in lowercase, and here's an example of a resource that's on the same machine, but just in the parent directory, then in a subdirectory, like a sibling directory, and then that web page is located in that part of the drive. And this is, as I say, Tim's brilliant idea. These days, what we do is we put that in a paragraph if it's part of some text. But as of HTML5, you're allowed to wrap a whole block of content, the whole web page, if you really want to. I'm not sure that would be needed. But there's no restriction on how much content you can put inside a hyperlink or an anchor element. And here's some examples, pretty much all the examples you'll ever need. So if you need to go to another web page in the same directory, you can just type this. If you need to go to a subdirectory, you just say subdirectory name / and the name. If you need to go to a parent directory, you just type .. If you need to go up another level, just .. and keep going. And at some point you will find the page you're looking for. Now on core teaching, hopefully this number will be your student number. So if you want to reference your links, not in a relative way, but in an absolute way, this is how you do it. So this will link to your public_HTML directory. And then from there you say my WP directory and whatever page you're looking for in that directory structure. It's just an alternative way of referencing your web pages. But if you need to make an external call to another machine, you just type in HTTP or HTTPS, and you can go to another server and go to another page in their directory tree, and so you can have subdirectories there, but this would be located in their root web folder. So their public_HTML folder, if you like. So these are referencing other resources, but we can also link to another place in the document that we're in. So if you say hash something, that will jump you to a place in the document that has a unique ID, and we'll be looking at IDs in a moment. So you give an element an ID, and it will jump to that element. And I'll just give you an example. So right at the top, I've got these links. So let's just have a look at one of them. So sorry, just losing the plot a bit. So I've got hash TTP www. So if I click on that link, I get directed to this slide, and there's its ID TP. So TP stands for topic, and the topic is www. That's just my naming scheme. So let me just find where we were. You'll be actually using this in your assignment 2. So what I want to have is a single page application. There will be another page, which is the receipt, but most of the programming for assignment 2 and assignment 3 will be in a single web page. So you will need links that jump you to content in that page. Hypertext can also be used to generate email links. So you click on this and you jump to, so if you click on that, it should open up your Outlook or your Mac mail program and start sending an email to someone. Now, I think if this works, it should be your student ID. So you can actually test it out, make sure it works. So a bit of a summary. By the end of version 1, you could put in meta tags that give some information about the author details, keywords, creation date. That all goes in the head element, or back in the day, header element. In a document, Tim's original plan was it was just communications, say within scientific groups. I mean, he probably had a view it could grow larger, but the immediate need was scientists and engineers need to communicate their findings faster. So if you ever wonder whether we're wasting money smashing high energy particles together in, colliders, there are great spin-offs from these projects, which, are usually completely unrelated. So, every document needs headings, it needs paragraphs, and also it needs, unordered lists, like this list here. Ordered lists if you need numbers, and a document list as well. And inside you need list items. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this unordered list element has got 5 li elements. And just to show you that's true, just click on inspect. There's the unordered list element, and each one of these is a list element. Now, this is a comprehensive list of the elements that were in use as of, I think, the HTML version 1. So you can see 1992. So that's a historical document, but it's nice to see that even in 1992, in November the 3rd, there were already some elements which were deprecated and retired. So HTML versions 2 and 3, I think 2 was skipped completely. 3 was released, but the problem is there were other groups that were starting to basically develop their own tags and ways of doing things. I'll talk about them very soon. So we started to see useful elements such as the image and table tags. Tim didn't even think we needed images in our pages initially. I think he changed his mind, but that just shows you how quickly the project, the World Wide Web project, took off. And also, we need tables to put in, data, scientific data. I'll talk about the table because the table tag got very overused in the late 90s and early 2000s, really to just lay out content in the web page. So there are better ways of laying out content than using tables, but tables are still valid if you're laying out tabular data. So I just want to make that 100% clear. And then there were some really dire ones. So blinking text. Thank you, Firefox, and also marquee tags where text would scroll across the screen. Again, if you put these in a website, people will judge you badly, so don't do it. And also, there were new tags and attributes to control font style, color border, and alignment. These are all deprecated and have been replaced with style sheets, and really they should not be in a website that has been developed this century. They were fine for the 1990s, but not anymore. And part of assignment 1 is actually finding, maybe there's more than one, maybe there's just one tag that needs to be removed. So I've got like some bad code that you need to delete. It's pretty obvious. If it exists, the wireframe style sheet will have a big red sign saying remove this content. So when those signs disappear, you will have done your job. So just on this, I actually refer to I think Hakon. I'm not sure how to pronounce this. I think he's Norwegian. So he came into the project later and realized that people were just basically making screenshots of web pages made in Word and putting them on the internet. So he realized that we really did need we really did need style sheets. And he worked out that obviously sometimes you'd have rules where there would be a conflict. And so we needed sort of cascading style sheet rules in order to apply styles to elements. He's also famous for co-founding the Pirate Party in Norway and sailing a raft, I think, from Peru to Easter Island, I think in 2015 or 2016. So he's definitely an interesting, adventurous person. So he's got a talk on his contribution to the World Wide Web project. Very interesting if you are interested in the history of HTML and CSS, which we'll be covering in weeks 2, 3, and 4. No, weeks 3, 4, and 5. So yes, this was what I was referring to. So during the sort of early and mid 90s, Netscape Navigator that became Firefox, Microsoft, they were competing for market browser dominance, and they developed ways of doing things so that you couldn't develop pages consistently. So it would look very different and would work very differently in one browser. That is really no longer a problem today. There's some small differences, but largely all browsers are seeking to adhere to the official W3C organization's standards. So again, more history. In the late 90s or 2000s, a company called Macromedia, later acquired by Adobe, realized that web pages looked like bad clip art Word documents, and so they created a program that you could really lay out your content really nicely and even have animated content. And whilst I'm doing this, I'll just show you a picture of something I helped develop back in the day. And so what you'd have is, you'd have this really nice sort of animation to keep people occupied whilst the huge page was loading. And we'll just see, exactly how long that was taking. Unfortunately, this link no longer works, so this has been retired. But essentially, you could do really cool things like this in Flash. And we'll probably see a really quick flash how the pages, you see the pages haven't finished loading. But as you're flicking through, the idea is that, you know, whilst the user is occupied with the early pages, the later pages would load. So it's a shame that that's no longer active. So yeah, for a while there, you know, HTML was looking like it was just going to be a container for Flash websites. So the first step towards modernizing was to sort of remove these styling tags, and these were moved into CSS. These bold and italic were replaced by this, and I'm part of the community that thinks this was a bit of overkill. And in HTML5, bold and italic are back, with slightly different meanings to strong and emphasis. They have the same default visual layout, but you know, if you say text is bold, there's a slight semantic difference between saying that it's strong, and also emphasized text is slightly different to I. But just to give you good news, bold and italic is back. It's allowed as long as it means something in your web page. But these ones are dead. If you see them in your code, they're no longer part of the standard. So XHTML, this is a standard that's been deprecated, but more often than not, if you're asked to maintain a page, it will most likely be an XHTML standard. So if you see a HTML4 page, it's probably quite rare. So most pages that need updating are XHTML pages, and the rules were very strict. So all tags must be lowercase. Tags must be closed. So if you open one, it must be closed. And there we'll see some empty tags, so where they're not paired. So a BR opens and closes, and so you had to close it like this. So extra typing, very annoying. And also tags had to be nested correctly. So if you wanted text to be strong and emphasized, you have to wrap them correctly. You can't have EM this side. So things have to be nested inside correctly. And you needed to have quotes. You needed quotes for attributes. So for example, a hyperlink, href equals quotes, even though there's no spaces here. And this was the worst one. If you have a checkbox in a form, you have to say checked equals, in quotes, checked. We'll see that HTML5 has made some simplifications of these soon. The simple HTML declaration is like this. So if you see this at the top of a page, you know it's an XHTML document. But these days, much simpler. Just doctype HTML and pop in the language. Generally, English is the default, but it's nice to say lang equals en. So XHTML was abandoned in 2009, and really HTML 5 was approved in 2014, which we'll see soon. And yeah, things are a little bit simpler today. So as I said, Flash was really taking over in the early 2000s, but then a couple of events made HTML more attractive. And I think the key one was really people were using search engines to find content. And of course, content inside Flash was not indexed. So if you actually wanted your page to be found in a search engine, you had to go back to HTML. So of all of these, reasons, I think that was probably the most significant that swung usage back to using HTML. So the HTML5 rules revision, and this was approved in October 2014. We can do this now. We can just say BR. Computers know that the BR tag is empty. If there are no spaces in the attributes, we can just say value equals 1. We don't need quotes, and that can be quite handy if you're using code to generate attributes. You don't need to worry about putting the quotes in correctly. And any obvious attributes can be minimized. So instead of saying selected equals selected, you can just put the word selected, and that's interpreted as selected equals true. Bold and italics were brought back with new clarified semantic meaning. So I'll let you read that. And what I've done is, because I like italic and I want to have text that's underlined. So when you underline text, that's what I'm using emphasize text for. And I think an underline style actually makes more sense. So if you see any of my EMs, they'll be underlined, and any italicized elements will be like this, italicized. So here are the new elements and attributes, and these are very search engine friendly. So here's that header tag I was talking about before. This is now part of the body element. So any content, now I won't scroll all the way back up to the top of the page because that will be annoying. Maybe I'll just go to Canvas. Actually, Canvas doesn't really have a header element. I suppose this kind of is a header element. This is definitely a navigation element. So here's your navigation element. There's your navigation. And I'll just bring my navigation element back. The main is kind of, if you like, the main part of a website. And in my slides, it's basically all the slides. Every slide series is an... I better just check this. I don't want to say the wrong thing. Okay, so every series of slides I have as an article. Let's scroll up. So the whole lecture 1 is an article. So articles should be standalone content. So if I'm searching on the web for something, search engines will start to recognize articles as self-contained content. And sections obviously can go inside articles, so they just sort of break up the content a little bit. So each slide is a section, but there's no reason why articles can't go inside sections. So for example, a newspaper will have, say, a sports section, and there will be sports articles inside that sports section. So the trick is that articles have to be self-contained content, so they should make sense on their own if you were to find them in a content aggregator. So I've got a first web page. So when you click try it, will open up in a new tab. So it goes in a new tab. And if you edit this code, so blah, 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 and then press try it, it will update. Okay, that's in a comment, so that won't show. So let's just do some word bashing there. When I click try it, there's that adjustment. So what I'd like you to do is, no marks associated with this task. I've got some, I say create some H2, H3 tags here. I don't know why I've got that as a capital. That's bad. So I've got some little tasks just so you can have a little bit of a play. And I've got the again, I've got to say what type of list. It's either a descriptive list or a document list. And, you know, put some more items in this list, and play with the ordered list, and change the ordered list to the unordered list to an ordered list. I'll just show you how easy this one is. So if I change that to an O, see, I'm not changing the list elements. So at the moment, they're just bullets. But if I say try it, they are now numbered. So you don't actually have to modify what's inside. You just have to modify this parent tag. So have a play with that. And here we have the table element. And I do have an exercise in, I think, the second tute and lab for you to play with. And so it has some semantic parts, so header, body, and footer, but you know, a lot of the time you can sort of get away with this. But it means that if you ever put your footer up here, you're guaranteed it will be at the bottom of the page, which is quite handy. And you can also knock, if you need a cell to expand left and right or down, you can do some sort of construction or deconstruction with col span and row span attributes. So I've got an example here. Let me just press try it. No, it'll open up in the same page. So don't close this page, it'll stay open. Actually, I'll put this in that so it's out of the way. Now, one of the problems with markup and hypertext is these characters, the greater than sign and, sorry, the less than sign and the greater than sign, these have special meaning. So if we actually want to, you know, pop the actual text in, we need to have a kind of like an escape sequence. So what HTML does is if it ever sees the ampersand sign, there's going to be something in between it and a semicolon. So you can see here amp less than and then the letter P and then amp greater than semicolon, and that will give you this text here. And you know, I sort of just go on here, we've got the less than and greater than sign. And of course, if you want an ampersand sign, you need to say ampersand amp semicolon. If you fail to do that, look, browsers are very forgiving. Browsers will try and guess what you're trying to do. So just because the browser is not rendering your code, sorry, let me say this, just because the browser is not failing to render your code doesn't mean you're not writing bad code. So if this was Java or C, you'd get a nice compile error or runtime error, but you won't necessarily get that information when you're doing bad things in HTML programming. So it's good. It means that the entry bar is very low, but the bad sign is if you're a sloppy coder, you might always be a sloppy coder. And I've just got an example of where I'm trying to obviously do this recursive. So if you want that, you need to type this. And of course, if you want that, you'd need to type this. And I'm just showing you in the code that, you know, this kind of gets a little bit ridiculous. And if you want the infinity symbol, there's even a code for that. So I've got some more examples. So this one is good list of HTML entities, but I just want to advise you, modern day HTML5 now has the UTF-8 standard as the default. So it means that most of these characters have got like a UTF code. So you can find that character and post them. And it even contains emojis. Hopefully this is working on your computer. These characters are actually emoji characters. So that's the printer emoji characters and the eye emoji characters. So this is how flexible and how far we've come with typography. Back in the past, we had to have these characters because we only had ASCII characters. So it's a lot richer these days. However, the greater than, less than, and ampersand characters, we still need to use HTML entity characters for those. So this is UTF-8. This could be, a course on its own. Tom here gives a really nice talk about the history of how it works. Very engaging. Strongly recommend you have a look at it. So the original ASCII characters, they only take up 1 byte of memory. Then to expand for the sort of European and Middle Eastern characters, so this is like, Iraq, some of the, the Arabian characters, but I'm also including, Israel and that whole area. That pretty much included those characters. Then 3 bytes going further into Asia. So obviously some languages have got more glyphs than more European languages. And finally, the sort of very obscure Asian characters are included in the 4th row. And notice how many characters, as the number of bytes increases, we can, include far more characters than the previous set. And we even have Mayan and Egyptian hieroglyphs if you need that. And of course, emojis are now included. Okay, so now we look at block and inline elements. And what I've got here, and I think if I click on this, or maybe it's the next slide. So what you'll find is some elements, like headings, are actually block elements. So if I inspect this element, you can see that even though the contents don't go for the whole line, the browser has reserved the whole line for this element. So this heading is a block element, and heading elements by default are block elements. Likewise, paragraphs are also block elements, but if you look inside a paragraph, you will see that there are some inline elements. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down to this one. Okay, this one's not quite working properly, but this element here, let me just select it, is breaking across a line. So unfortunately, it's not highlighting it properly, but list elements is breaking across the line. So inline elements kind of go with the flow of text and will break if there's not enough space to put it here. But if I create enough space, it'll pop up. But if not, it'll go down. So that's how you recognize an inline element. This will not happen for a block element, although maybe I can prove myself sort of a liar. Just trying to find an element with a big enough title. No, unfortunately, my heading's too small, and this browser won't let me go beyond a certain point. But if you have a very long one, you'll find that the contents does break line, but if you right-click and actually select the heading, you'll see that the heading still goes for the entire page. So as I said, the original standard, it really just had paragraphs, headings, listing elements. And in HTML4, it was clear that we kind of need sort of like blank containers, like, just logical containers to put content inside. So 2 context-free containers were invented. So one was called div, and this is like a block element, and spans. If you have some inline element, so inline element that will flow and maybe break across a line if there's no room. So there's no styling associated, but they behave, they have this block and inline behavior. So one analogy I've got is, you know, a div is like a sort of box of chocolates. It goes for the whole line. And inside you can have like some spans and also spaces between the spans as well. So I've got an example here. So I think if I click on this, oh yeah, here we go. If you click on this div, you see that it does go from one side of the page to the other. And whereas a span, and I've got a couple here, if you click on these, you can see that they're going along, then there's not enough room, and then they'll just reflow across to the next line. Maybe if I shrink the page now, you can see that block breaking. Oh, cool, that's good. So even though the content inside this div is now on 2 lines, you can see that there is a block. It's like a square block that goes from one side of the page to the other. Whereas the spans, they start here and where they finish is quite arbitrary. Like this one spans 3 lines, but not 3 full lines. This spans 2 full lines, so it's a block element. Scroll back down to where we were. And I think finishing today's lecture, any element can either belong to a class or many classes, but it can have one ID. So IDs must be unique, and each element can only have one ID. So there's a many-to relationship with classes, so which I'll sort of move on to in a moment. But it's very important that no ID is duplicated, because when we come to hyperlinks, so internal hyperlinks, you want to go to the place in the page, not a place in the page. And also when we get to JavaScript and CSS styling, if you're using ID tags, it's important that, you know, it's just one element, otherwise there'll be problems. So to summarize, an element should only have one ID, and there should only ever be one ID in a page. It's okay to have the same ID in another page. So it's very much like your student ID. You only have one student ID. If you have more than one, that's a problem. Go see Connect on level 4 at RMIT, or just send them an email. And of course, definitely no 2 students should have the same SID. That would be a complete disaster. So you should see your student number there, fingers crossed. And but when it comes to classes, obviously a student can be a member of many classes, and many elements can also have the same class. So as I said, there's a many-to-many relationship there. Okay, so that's lecture 1, TLDR. I'm not sure how TLDR these lectures are turning out to be, but fingers crossed they're not too long. What I'd like you to do now is have a read of week 2's materials, so the HTML materials, and come to the week 1 chat, hopefully with some kind of preparation of that content. So see you in the chat.